I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On July the 4th, the country voted for change. This government was given a mandate to restore stability to our economy and to begin a decade of national renewal. To fix the foundations and deliver change through responsible leadership in the national interest. That is our task, and I know that we can achieve it. My belief in Britain burns brighter than ever, and the prize on offer is immense. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said on Monday, change must be felt. More pounds in people's pockets, an NHS that is there when you need it, an economy that is growing, creating wealth and opportunity for all, because that is the only way to improve living standards. And the only way to drive economic growth is to invest, invest, invest. There are no shortcuts. And to deliver that investment, we must restore economic stability and turn the page on the last 14 years. This is not the first time that it has fallen to the Labour Party to rebuild Britain. In 1945, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our country from the rubble of the Second World War. In 1964, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt Britain with the white heat of technology. And in 1997, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our schools and hospitals. Today, it falls to this Labour Party, to this Labour government, to rebuild Britain once again. And while this is the first budget in more than 14 years to be delivered by a Labour Chancellor, it is the first budget in our country's history to be delivered by a woman. I am deeply proud to be Britain's first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To girls and young women everywhere, I say, let there be no ceiling on your ambition, your hopes, and your dreams. And along with the pride that I feel standing here today, there is also a responsibility to pass on a fairer society and a stronger generation to the next generation of women. Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite failed our country. Their austerity broke our National Health Service. Their Brexit deal harmed British businesses. And their mini-budget left families paying the price with higher mortgages. The British people have inherited their failure. A black hole in the public finances. Public services on their knees. A decade of low growth and the worst parliament on record for living standards. Let me begin with the public finances. In July, I exposed a £22 billion black hole at the heart of the previous government's plans. A series of promises that they made but had no money to deliver. Covered up from the British people, covered up from this House. The Treasury's reserve, set aside for genuine emergencies, spent 3 times over just 3 months into the financial year. Today, on top of the detailed document that I have provided to the House in July, the government is publishing a line-by-line breakdown of the £22 billion black hole that we inherited. It shows hundreds of unfunded pressures on the public finances this year and into the future too. The Office for Budget Responsibility have published their own review of the circumstances around the spring budget forecast. They say that the previous government, and I quote, did not provide the OBR with all the information to them. And had they known about these undisclosed pressures that have since come to light, then their spring budget forecast for spending would have been, and I quote again, materially different. Let me be clear. That means any comparison between today's forecast and the OBR's March forecast is false, because the party opposite hid the reality of their public spending plans. Yet, at the very same budget, they made another £10 billion worth of cuts to national insurance. It was the height of irresponsibility, and they knew it, because they had run out of road and they called an election to avoid making difficult choices. So let me make this promise to the British people. Never again will we allow a government to play fast and loose with the public finances. And never again will we allow a government to hide the true state of our public finances from our independent forecaster. That's why today I can confirm that we will implement in full the 10 recommendations from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibilities review. But the country has inherited not just broken public finances, but broken public services too. The British people can see and they can feel that in their everyday lives. NHS waiting lists at record levels. Children in porter cabins as school roofs crumble. Trains that do not arrive, rivers filled with polluted waste, prisons overflowing, crimes which are not investigated, and criminals who are not punished. That is the country's inheritance from the party opposite. But they had no plan to improve our public services. And they had no plan to put our public finances on a stable footing. Quite the opposite. Since 2021, there have been no detailed plans for departmental spending set out beyond this year. And their plans relied on a baseline for spending this year, which we now know was wrong, because it did not take into account the £22 billion black hole. The previous government also failed to budget for costs that they knew would materialise. That includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of two terrible injustices.
I just mentioned respecting colleagues. The public are watching. They want to hear what the Chancellor has to say. Simmer down.
I would politely suggest that honourable members listen to this, because it includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of two terrible injustices: the infected blood scandal and the Post Office Horizon scandal. The Leader of the Opposition rightly made an unequivocal apology for the injustice of the infected blood scandal on behalf of the British state. But he did not budget for the costs of compensation. Today, for the very first time, we will provide specific funding to compensate those infected and those affected in full. With £11.8 billion in this budget. And I am also today setting aside £1.8 billion to compensate victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal. Redress that is long overdue for the pain and injustice that they have suffered. Madam Deputy Speaker, the leadership campaign for the party opposite has now been going on for over 3 months. But in all that time, not one single apology for what they did to our country. Because the Conservative Party has not changed. But this is a changed Labour Party, and we will restore stability to our country once again. The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality.